Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on any purchase over $10. See the description below for details. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and it's that time of the week again to look at the results from the big tournaments that occurred over the weekend. And today we're going to focus on the Star City Games Baltimore events. Those include an Open, which was a team event consisting of Standard, Modern, and Legacy. We also had a Standard Classic, a Modern Classic, and a Legacy Classic. We'll be looking at the top 8s from those events as well as some deck lists, and we're going to focus in especially on how cards from Ravnica Allegiance played a role this weekend. Quickly before we get started though, just a fast reminder, if you check out the description below, you'll find a few ways to support the channel, one of which is our Patreon page. You're also going to find links to products on Amazon down there. Those always help us out as well. And finally, Flipside Gaming still offering a promo code for our viewers. And if you're looking for sleeves for your cards, they have a really good deal right now on Dragon Shield sleeves, 100 count for $7.99. Just letting you know if you need any. I thought it was a pretty good price. But as always, thank you not only to the folks that look at those links, but to each and every one of you. Y'all make the channel what it is. So thank you, and let's get into it. We'll begin as we always do as standard. First looking at the standard decks that were in the top 8 of the Star City Games Open. Now, like I said at the top of the show, remember this is a team event. So the team themselves got in the top 8. It doesn't necessarily mean these were the best standard decks that were in that tournament. It could mean that you had a weaker standard deck that got propped up by good modern and legacy decks. So just remember that as we go through. But here is your top 8. Our first place deck was Azorius Aggro. Second place, Sultai Midrange. Third place, Bant Tokens. Fourth, fifth, sixth, and eighth place, Esper Control. Seventh place, Bant Nexus. So when I saw this, I got a little nervous. I don't like to see one deck starting to take over the format as much as Esper Control looked like it was taking over the format just here in week 2. However, remember the team event in the Open is a different meta. So when we look at the Classic results in a few moments, the Esper Control deck was nowhere near as dominating. You'll see that in a second. But anyway, let's look at some of these deck lists. First place is Azorius Aggro. We saw this build last week. It's very similar to the white weenie decks from the previous season, or the Boros weenie decks that had a lot of the red coming in out of the sideboard. Now, in this case, you see familiar cards like Benalish Marshal, one of the key cards to the strategy. You're going to find 4 Conclave Tribunal, 4 History of Benalia, 4 Legion's Landing, 3 Adanto Vanguards. You also have 2 Ajani Adversary of Titans coming out of the sideboard. But you also have some new cards that definitely influence this deck. And those cards are Tithe Taker, Deputy of Detention, and Hallowed Fountain. Couple differences, though, I will point out from this Azorius Aggro deck and a deck that did well in the Classic. There was one that came in second place there. That deck was running 4 Tithe Takers. This build was only running 1. That other build was also running a copy of Unbreakable Formation in the main. That's something we saw with this deck build last week as well. Second place was Sultai Midrange. If you're a fan of last season's Golgari Midrange deck, well, you're going to like this deck. It's basically the same thing. There's one really good reason to make it a Sultai deck, which we'll look at in just a moment, but you still have a lot of familiar cards here. 2 Karns in this build, 3 Vivian Reeds. Find a Finality shows up here. Vraska's Contempts are here. Assassin's Trophy, Cast Down. A lot of the creatures from the Creature Suite you're familiar with. This does have Hostage Takers, though, which is one of the reasons to bring blue into it, but another big reason is on the next page. Let's look at those Ravnica Allegiance cards. We have Biogenic Ooze, just 1 copy. Not all variants of this deck are running that card, but some are. Incubation Druid is here, and here's the big reason to play blue. Hydroid Krasis. You also have Breeding Pool coming in for the mana base. Cry of the Carnarium is in the sideboard. Third place Bant Tokens, and this is yet another deck that was around last season that got some upgrades this time around. But again, if you look at the core of this deck, it's going to look very familiar. 4 Conclave Tribunal, 4 History of Benalia, 4 March of the Multitudes, 4 Flower and Flourish, 2 Ajani Adversary of Tyrants, 4 Llanowar Elves, 4 Amaro Soul the Akora, 3 Tristani Discordant. Sounds familiar, right? Well, again, there's some really good upgrades, though, that make this deck better. And here they are. Incubation Druid, Hydroid Krasis, get used to seeing this card, it shows up in a lot of places. Breeding Pool and Hallowed Fountain for the new mana base. Out of the sideboard, another copy of Hydroid Krasis, because why not? Okay, we'll look at the 4th place version of the Esper Control deck, but there are some differences. This is maybe one of the looser deck lists still in week 2, where people are still kind of trying to figure out exactly what they want to put into it. So let's look at this deck list, then I'll tell you about some of the differences that I've seen. So for this particular one, 4 Teferis, and yeah, okay, we're kind of used to seeing that, the Teferi win condition. Now, aside from that, you're going to see a lot of really strong control cards here. Chemist's Insight, Cast Down, Moment of Craving makes it in here. Vraska's Contempt's 3 of those. 2 Search for Azcanta, and 4 Thought Erasures. But a lot of big cards coming from Ravnica Allegiance. Let's take a look at them. 6 altogether that are from the new set. Kaya's Wrath, maybe one of the best reasons to play Esper Control over a lot of other color combinations. Precognitive Perceptions here. Absorb, Mortify, Godless Shrine, Hallowed Fountain. And out of the sideboard, Cry of the Carnarium again. Now, a couple differences I've noticed. If you looked at the deck that came in 5th place, for example, they were running 2 cards in the main, so that's a little different. They were also running a copy of Consecrate and Consume and a copy of Warrant and Warden in the main. They also have 3 copies of Basilica Bell Haunt in the side. Now, that's something I've seen in a few different builds. As a matter of fact, the 6th place deck also was running 3 of those in the sideboard, and they were running a Chromium the Mutable in the main. That's something we saw last week as well. The 8th place deck was doing something actually kind of different. They were running 1 copy of Kaya Orzhov Usurper in the main. That was kind of interesting. They also had 2 copies of Deputy of Detention in the sideboard. So, like I was saying, this deck is still in flux. People are trying to figure out the best build, and I'm sure it will solidify in the coming weeks. Alright, let's look at the 7th place Bant Nexus deck now. And again, Bant Nexus is not a new thing, but there's a lot of new cards that make this deck better. So let's look at the old ones first. 4 Nexus of Fate, of course, one of the key cards, obviously. Then you also have 3 Root Snares, 4 Search for Azcanta, 3 Teferi, Hero of Dominaria for a win condition. Okay, so what does the new set bring? Well, some real big cards. Precognitive Perception is here, Growth Spiral, Depose and Deploy. The biggest one, Wilderness Reclamation. This is really great in this kind of build. Breeding Pool and Hallowed Fountain. Out of the sideboard, Angel of Grace and Deputy of Detention. Okay, let's go beyond the top 8. There were a couple other interesting decks I wanted to point out to you, and one of them was Temur Reclamation, which came in 10th place. Now, this is basically a big mana burn deck with X spells. One of the key cards here is Expansion and Explosion, and you see, with the big mana generation as well as some big X payoff spells, you also have some control elements here. Things like Chemist's Insight, you have Radical Idea, Opt, Shocks, which can go to the face or can be used to clean up the ground. Same with Lightning Strike, 3 of those. Sinister Sabotages are in here, 2 Search for Azcanta. This is a really interesting build. Let's look at the new cards. Electro Dominance, so another one of these X spells that can go to the face and put away a game. Growth Spirals here. Wilderness Reclamation, another key card here to get your mana back. Breeding Pool, Stomping Ground. Cindervines is in the sideboard. 13th place was Mono Blue Aggro, or Mon Blue Aggro, as Star City Games called it here. This deck is still kicking around and can put up a nice result. As you can see, there's not a lot of new cards here. We'll look at them in just a moment, though, but for the most part, another deck list you're going to be familiar with. The 4 Tempest Djinns are here. Siren Storm Tamer shows up. Warkite Marauders, Merfolk Tricksters, Mist-Cloaked Herald. You got Dive Down, Opt, Spell Pierce, Wizard's Retort, a lot of the cards that you know from this deck, but what's new? Couple copies of Sphinx of Foresight. Seems like it would be great in this deck, actually. And out of the sideboard, Essence Capture. Is It Phoenix is here in 16th place, and last week we saw a Drake deck do well, and this is basically the same deck, except it is running the 4 Arclight Phoenixes. The Drake deck we saw last week was not. So it goes to show you, much like we saw at the end of the last Standard season, seems like this deck is viable with the Phoenixes or without the Phoenixes. We'll have to figure out as time goes on which one is better, if any. But again, you're not going to be too shocked by what you see here. We mentioned the Phoenixes already. Crackling Drake is here. Goblin Electromancer. Shocks are here, of course. Radical Idea, Opt, Spell Pierce, Beacon Bolt. Your cheap spells, right? So, aside from that, one really big difference. And that's the copies of Terramander in these decks. This card is super sweet and can be very, very aggressive. Blood Crypt is here too to smooth out your mana, so why do you need Blood Crypt in an Izzet deck? Basically, if you want to play the other side of Discovery Dispersal, this will allow you to do it. 22nd place, we found 4-color Gates, and we saw this deck last week. It's really sweet, using a lot of the new cards. And obviously, this is a Gate strategy, taking advantage of some of those Gate Matters cards, but also throwing in a very powerful creature just because it's really good. And here's your new cards. Archway Angel, Gatebreaker Ram to fit into the strategy of Gates Matter. Hydroid Crisis is the powerful creature I was mentioning. Basically, you can just slide this into any deck where you're playing these colors. It's probably going to be good at this point. Gate Colossus, another card that plays with the gates. Mass Manipulation, Gates Ablaze is here. Growth Spiral. Let's look at the mana. Here's your new mana-based cards. Azorius Guildgate, Gruul Guildgate, Plaza of Harmony, and Simic Guildgate. Out of the sideboard, a couple more copies of Archway Angel, a couple more copies of Gatebreaker Ram, another copy of Gate Colossus, so more of the gate plan if you want to go heavier on these type of creatures, and then Cindervines is also here. Alright, so let's move on to the Star City Games Classic. Now this is a smaller tournament, however, this is just a standard tournament. So let's look at the top 8. Sultai Midrange came in 1st and 8th. Azorius Aggro came in 2nd. Simic Nexus came in 3rd. Nexus of Gates, yeah, wait for it, we'll look at it, came in 4th. Mono Red Aggro came in 5th and 6th. Esper Control came in 7th here. So you are seeing still a little more diversity this time around compared to what we saw in the open standard results. And when you put the two together, there's actually a fair amount of diversity, which I'm hoping sticks around in the coming weeks. Okay, we're going to look at some deck lists we haven't looked at yet, starting with the 3rd place Simic Nexus deck. So this is a variation on Bat Nexus. What you're seeing here is some different win conditions, though. Instead of Teferi, you have some creatures. Those creatures are from the new set, so we'll look at those in just a second. But aside from that, a lot of the cards we saw from the previous builds, right? Nexus of Fates here, you got your Root Snare, Search for Azcanta, so on and so forth. Let's look at these new cards, though. Frilled Mystic, which is a beater, but also a control card for you, so that's perfect in this deck. Hydroid Crisis, which is basically perfect in any deck. Precognitive Perception is here. Growth Spiral, Wilderness Reclamation, again, of course. Breeding Pool, and Simic Guildgate. Out of the sideboard, Mass Manipulation, and Sagittar's Volley. Okay, let's look at this 4th place Nexus of Gates deck. Now, you can probably imagine what this is. It's a cross between a Gate deck and a Nexus deck. So you see pieces from the Nexus deck here for Nexus of Fate, for example. You got some control elements like Lava Coil and Chemist's Insight. But then aside from that, you have some Gate Matters things going on too. Gates Ablaze is here. Circuitous Root, for example, to get your gates. And Guild Summit is in the main for those. So you put the two together, and here you go. Throw in a very powerful creature, and that is Hydroid Crisis. Okay, so here's all the new cards you'll find in this build aside from the Crisis. Gates Ablaze, Growth Spiral, Wilderness Reclamation again, of course, Azorius Guildgate, Breeding Pool, Gruul Guildgate, Plaza of Harmony, Simic Guildgate. Out of the sideboard, Archway Angel and Gatebreaker Ram. So these aren't in the main, they come out of the side if you want to go deeper into the gate strategy for Game 2 or Game 3. 5th place, Mono Red Aggro, and this build very similar to the 6th place build as well. We saw this last week, a lot of cards that we're familiar with from this particular archetype, but throwing in 2 new very, very good spells. 4 copies of Light Up the Stage, 4 copies of Skewer the Critics. Outside of the top 8, in 15th place we had Jeskai Control, so that deck is still viable and still pretty familiar. 4 Niv Mizzet Parent, 3 copies of Teferi Hero of Dominaria, 4 Treasure Maps, you have an Expansion Explosion in here, 4 Ops, 3 Negates, Settle the Wreckage, a copy of that, 4 Deafening Clarions. New cards include Precognitive Perception, Absorb, and Hallowed Fountain. Alright, let's move on to Modern, and we're going to go back to the Star City Games Open. Remember, again, this is the team tournament, and the top 8 teams were playing these Modern decks. 1st place, Teamer Phoenix. 2nd place, Mono Red Phoenix. 3rd place, as well as 5th place, Grixis Death Shadow. 4th place, Amulet Titan. 5th place, Dredge. 7th place, Mono Green Tron. 8th place, Burn. Okay, so a couple thoughts on these decks. I mean, first off, Phoenix deck's still looking extremely good, coming in 1st and 2nd place here. Also, Grixis Death Shadow continues to be solid. Amulet Titan has been heating up. Dredge has been solid for a long time now. Of course, Mono Green Tron, everybody loves Tron. And the Burn deck at the end, those are also heating up, no pun intended, of course. Alright, so let's look at a couple of the decks that do have some new cards in them. And here is that 2nd place Mono Red Phoenix deck. Hasn't changed a whole lot generally. 4 copies of Arclight Phoenix, other aggro creatures. You got your cheap spells like Gut Shot, Manamorphose here, Lightning Bolt, Lava Spike, so on and so forth. But the big additions come in the form of these 2 cards again. Light Up the Stage and Skewer the Critics, 4 copies of each. And here's the 8th place burn deck. You can probably guess which cards have made it into here as well, right? Again, look at the deck list. Doesn't look like anything too crazy or too new. However, hiding in those spells include 4 copies of Light Up the Stage, 4 copies of Skewer the Critics. Now, there was a burn deck that top 8'd the Classic tournament, only running 3 copies of Light Up the Stage and 4 copies of Skewer the Critics. So I guess 4 and 4 is not set in stone. But overall, these cards are having a huge impact, not just on Standard, but also Modern. Cindervines was in the sideboard here. Alright, let's look at the Star City Games Classic Top 8. Jeskai Control came in 1st place. Azorius Control came in 2nd. Mono Green Tron 3rd. Burn came in 4th. 5th place Banned Spirits. 6th place Jeskai Control again. 7th place War Prison. 8th place Colorless Eldrazi. You put the 2 tournaments together, and yeah, you actually do have a fair amount of diversity still going on. In this particular event, control decks were stronger. The only deck using new cards, though, was that burn deck, which I mentioned before. And so let's look at Legacy. Now, there's no new cards in the Legacy top 8s. However, I thought let's go ahead and see what's going on in the world of Legacy. Here's your top 8 for the Open, again, the team tournament. 1st place, Dimir Death Shadow. 2nd place, as well as 3rd place, Grixis Delver. Golgari Depths came in 4th place. 5th place, 4-color Loam. 6th place, Lands. 7th place, Colorless Eldrazi. 8th place, Miracles. So, again, a lot of the usual suspects here. And in the Legacy Classic, we see some new decks, as well as some decks that we saw in the Open. Azorius Delver came in 1st. Dimir Death Shadow shows up here in 2nd. Dimir Delver 3rd. Grixis Control 4th. Sneak and Show 5th. Miracles 6th. Azorius Stoneblade 7th. Death and Taxes 8th. Alright, with that being said, that is a look at the results from this previous weekend. So, the Standard format is starting to shape up. I'll be curious, though, to see what happens over the next few weeks, because, again, the team tournament is a little unusual. The meta there is different, so that one may be kind of an outlier, but the Classic at least gives you an idea of what a lot of people are playing out there and things that you might see at your Friday Night Magic. So until next time, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible through the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page, as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.